January 1944. High above Germany, bomber formations push toward Berlin while Luftwaffe fighters climb to intercept. This time, however, something has changed. Long-range escorts now appear where German pilots once expected unprotected bombers. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang begins reshaping the strategic bombing campaign, extending Allied fighter protection deeper into enemy airspace and threatening the fragile balance sustaining Germany's industrial war machine. But why had Allied bombers spent years flying into Germany with limited escort protection? And could this new fighter truly shift control of the skies over Europe's most heavily defended targets? To understand how the air war reached that turning point, we need to go back. Long before the P-51 Mustang appeared among the most famous military aircraft in action of the Second World War, military planners debated how air power could shape the outcome of modern war. During the interwar years, strategists studied how aviation might alter the traditional balance between armies, navies, and industrial production in large global conflicts. Many concluded that future wars might be decided not only on the battlefield but by attacking the industrial systems supporting national war efforts. This idea evolved into the theory of strategic bombing, which argued that destroying factories, rail networks, and energy production could cripple an enemy's ability to continue fighting. These debates appear in National Archives military records and Shell Historical Film Archive history according to Americans studying early aviation doctrine. When the United States entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Allied leaders adopted the Germany First strategy. Within this strategy, Nazi Germany was considered the main industrial and military threat facing the Allied coalition. American planners believed sustained bombing could damage German aircraft production, fuel supplies, and transportation systems supporting the German war machine. Strategic bombing, therefore, became a central element of Allied tactical military strategy during the Second World War. Beginning in 1942, the U.S. Army Air Forces launched daylight bombing missions from airfields in England against targets across occupied Europe and Western Germany. These operations soon became a major chapter in aviation combat chronicles and broader military history. Large formations of B-17 and B-24 bombers flew toward factories, rail hubs, shipyards, and industrial complexes. American doctrine argued that heavy bomber formations could defend themselves using multiple defensive machine guns mounted across each aircraft. By flying in tight formations, bombers created overlapping defensive fire intended to repel enemy fighters. However, as missions expanded deeper into Germany, a critical weakness appeared. Escort fighters such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and the British Spitfire lacked the range necessary to travel with bombers across the entire mission. Once these escort fighters approached their fuel limits, they were forced to turn back toward England. From that point forward, bomber formations continued alone toward heavily defended targets deep inside Germany. Luftwaffe fighter units quickly adapted to exploit this vulnerability, launching coordinated interception attacks against the unescorted bomber formations. At the same time, German cities were protected by dense belts of anti-aircraft artillery. These combined defenses caused increasing bomber losses during deep raids in 1943. Military and veteran stories preserved in primary and secondary podcast discussions describe these missions as some of the most dangerous operations of the air war. Operational analysis eventually revealed a clear conclusion. Strategic bombing required a long-range fighter capable of escorting bombers across the entire mission into Germany and back. Solving this problem would lead directly to the arrival of the P-51 Mustang. During the early years of the Second World War, Allied planners understood that solving the escort problem would require a new generation of long-range fighter within rapidly evolving advanced weapons technology. The origin of that solution began not with American strategic planners, but with British requests for new fighter aircraft during the early stages of the war. British purchasing missions approached American manufacturers searching for aircraft that could be produced quickly to reinforce the Royal Air Force during intense World War battles across Europe. One of the designs proposed during this effort became the P-51 Mustang, an aircraft that would later become one of the most famous military aircraft in action. Early versions of the Mustang already displayed remarkable aerodynamic efficiency compared to many contemporary fighters operating in the Second World War. Engineers designed the aircraft with a laminar flow wing, a streamlined fuselage, and a structure optimized to reduce aerodynamic drag during high-speed flight. These features gave the Mustang exceptional range and fuel efficiency, characteristics that would later prove decisive in aviation combat chronicles of the European Air War. However, the first operational models faced a serious limitation that prevented immediate use as a high-altitude bomber escort. The aircraft originally used an Allison engine that performed well at low and medium altitudes, but struggled to maintain power in the thin air above 25,000 feet. Unfortunately, this altitude range was exactly where American bombers operated during strategic bombing missions over Germany. Because of this limitation, the early Mustang could not yet fulfill the critical requirement identified by Allied tactical military strategy planners. Engineers then began experimenting with a new engine solution that would fundamentally transform the aircraft's performance. The British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine had already proven capable of maintaining strong performance at high altitude. When this engine was installed in the Mustang airframe, the results dramatically improved the aircraft's capabilities. The new engine allowed the fighter to exceed speeds of more than 430 miles per hour while maintaining strong performance above 30,000 feet. This transformation created the improved P-51B and later the P-51D, versions that would become central to military aviation history of the war. Yet another innovation soon solved the final piece of the escort problem. Engineers equipped the aircraft with external drop tanks that significantly extended its operational range. With this addition, the Mustang could accompany bomber formations across much longer distances than earlier escort fighters. For the first time in the war, Allied bombers could receive fighter protection throughout nearly the entire mission profile. This new capability would soon reshape the balance of air power over Germany. Within the unfolding aviation combat chronicles of the Second World War, the P-51 Mustang was about to transform how Allied forces fought the air war over Europe. By late 1943 and early 1944, the first operational squadrons equipped with the P-51 Mustang began arriving in the European theater of the Second World War. Their arrival marked a turning point recorded in National Archives military records and Shell Historical Film Archive history, according to Americans documenting the evolution of the Allied air campaign. The Mustang quickly demonstrated that it was among the most capable military aircraft in action during the entire conflict. For Allied commanders directing the strategic bombing campaign, the aircraft provided the long-awaited answer to a problem that had threatened the entire offensive. Until this moment, escort fighters lacked the range necessary to accompany bombers deep into German airspace. Once those escorts turned back toward England, bomber formations continued alone into heavily defended territory. The Luftwaffe repeatedly exploited this gap, launching coordinated interception attacks against isolated bomber streams. With the arrival of the Mustang, that operational weakness began to disappear. The aircraft's long range, combined with external fuel tanks, allowed it to escort bombers throughout nearly the entire mission. This new capability transformed Allied tactical military strategy in the European air war. Previously, escort fighters remained close to bomber formations in a purely defensive role. Mustang pilots now adopted far more aggressive tactics. Instead of waiting near the bombers, they often flew ahead of the formations to intercept German fighters before attacks could begin. This approach disrupted Luftwaffe interception plans and forced German pilots into combat with Allied escorts earlier in the mission. These engagements became a central chapter within aviation combat chronicles of the air war over Europe. Mustang squadrons also began conducting fighter sweeps across German airspace. Pilots targeted enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground, attacking airfields and disrupting German fighter operations. For the Luftwaffe, the situation became increasingly dangerous. German pilots attempting to intercept bombers now encountered long-range escort fighters across much of the mission route. Instead of attacking unprotected bombers, they faced experienced Allied fighter pilots capable of matching or exceeding their aircraft in performance. Losses among German fighter units began to rise steadily. Within military history studies and military and veteran stories collected after the war, many accounts describe this period as the moment when the balance of the air war began shifting. The most symbolic demonstration of this new capability came during bombing operations directed against the German capital itself. Berlin represented one of the most heavily defended targets in the entire German air defense system. For much of the war, reaching Berlin with sustained daylight bombing missions had been extremely dangerous for Allied bomber formations. However, with the P-51 Mustang providing long-range escort, these missions became increasingly feasible. In 1944, American bomber forces began conducting repeated daylight raids against Berlin with full fighter escort. For the first time in the war, Allied bombers could travel to the center of Nazi Germany while protected by escort fighters for nearly the entire journey. This development represented a decisive shift within the larger sequence of World War battles unfolding across Europe. In the evolving story of military aircraft in action during the Second World War, the P-51 Mustang had fundamentally changed the reach of Allied air power. The introduction of the P-51 Mustang reshaped the balance of power in the skies over Europe during the later stages of the Second World War. With its exceptional range, the aircraft allowed Allied bombers to fly deep into German territory while remaining protected by fighter escort throughout the entire mission. This capability transformed transformed the strategic bombing campaign that had previously faced severe losses during unescorted operations. Within aviation combat chronicles and broader military history, the Mustang became one of the most decisive examples of advanced weapons technology influencing tactical military strategy. The effects of this shift were felt across Germany's war economy. Sustained bombing increasingly damaged factories, rail networks, and fuel infrastructure that supported German military operations across multiple World War battles. At the same time, Luftwaffe fighter units suffered mounting losses as they attempted to intercept bomber formations now protected by long-range escort fighters. Experienced German pilots became increasingly difficult to replace, weakening Germany's ability to defend its airspace. Military and veteran stories preserved in National Archives military records, and Shell Historical Film Archive history according to Americans describe this period as a turning point in the air war. By 1944, Allied bombers could reach Berlin and return safely under Mustang protection. In the history of military aircraft in action, the P-51 Mustang stands as a defining symbol of how technological innovation can change the course of war.